The heavy oak doors of courtroom 12 groaned as they opened, drawing every eye in the chamber. Into the room walked the teenager. 17 at most, he didn't belong here, or so it seemed. A black hoodie peeked from under his oversized blazer, his sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, and a backpack dangled from one shoulder like he'd just come from math class rather than a high-stakes trial. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Who let a kid in?" One man muttered. "Probably lost a broken bar. Court's no place for children," a woman whispered back, shaking her head. The bailiff, a broad-shouldered man with a square jaw, frowned at him. "Son," he called out, his deep voice cutting through the murmur, "you're in the wrong room. Juvenile hearings are 2 doors down." The boy stopped, his expression calm, almost amused, and adjusted his backpack. "No," he said simply, "I'm exactly where I need to be." His confidence unsettled the bailiff. Before the officer could reply, the judge himself reacted. From his tall seat at the bench, Judge Harrison peered down through thick glasses, his wrinkled face creasing into a smirk. He was a man who enjoyed control over the courtroom, control over lawyers, control over fate. The sight of this teenager strolling in with a backpack instead of a briefcase tickled him. "Well," the judge began, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "what do we have here? Career day, perhaps? Did one of my attorneys bring his son along to see what a real courtroom looks like?" Laughter rippled through the room. Attorneys at the gallery chuckled, the clerk stifled a grin, even a few members of the jury whispered behind their hands. The teenager didn't blush, didn't frown. He simply walked to the defense table, unzipped his backpack, and pulled out a battered leather folder. The folder looked old, weathered, its edges frayed as though it had been handled 1,000 times. He placed it neatly on the table, unbothered by the laughter. The judge tapped his gavel once. "Bailiff, escort this child out before we waste any more time." "Your Honor," the boy spoke up, his voice steady but surprisingly sharp, "with respect, I'm not here by mistake." The laughter died down slightly, curiosity creeping in. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And why are you here then, son? Do you think this is a debate club meeting?" The boy's gaze didn't waver. "I'm here as counsel. Defense counsel." The room froze. Then came a wave of snickering louder than before. Reporters at the back scribbled furiously, sensing a strange story brewing. A woman near the front let out a disbelieving snort. The opposing attorney, a seasoned man with a graying beard, chuckled darkly. "This is absurd. Your Honor, surely you're not going to humor a broken bar child." Judge Harrison leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand, still smirking. "Counsel, is it? Do you even know what that word means? You should be worrying about algebra tests, not opening statements. This is a court of law, not a classroom." The boy calmly opened his folder, revealing a neatly organized stack of notes, highlighted passages, and clipped legal references. He set them out in deliberate order, his movements meticulous. "If you let me speak," he said evenly, "I'll prove I'm more prepared than anyone else in this courtroom." His words struck like a pin in a balloon and the laughter faltered, some people shifting in their seats. The judge shook his head, chuckling again, though less convincingly this time. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit doesn't win cases." He gestured to the bailiff again. "Please, before he embarrasses himself further up." The boy raised his voice, clear and commanding. "If my client's right to counsel is denied today, it'll be a violation of the 6th Amendment. Do you really want that on the record, Your Honor?" The courtroom went utterly silent. No one laughed now. Even the bailiff hesitated, hand hovering but unwilling to touch the boy. The judge blinked, caught off guard by the invocation of constitutional law so quickly, so confidently, from someone who wasn't supposed to know it. "Who are you?" he demanded finally, voice sharper than before. The boy allowed the faintest hint of a smile. "Someone who's going to make you regret underestimating me." A hush fell. The laughter was gone. The game, it seemed, had only just begun. The stillness in the courtroom lasted only a few seconds before it shattered again. A ripple of laughter swept across the gallery, this time louder, harsher, as if the audience had been holding it back and couldn't resist any longer. Reporters whispered furiously to each other, pens scratching on notepads. "This'll make the front page," one said, eyes gleaming. The opposing attorney, Richard Blake, leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with a smirk plastered across his weathered face. He'd been practicing law for 30 years, winning high-profile cases and priding himself on dismantling opponents in court. Now he found himself staring at a teenager who dared to call himself defense counsel. It was so absurd, Blake could hardly breathe for laughing. "Your Honor," Blake began in a booming voice, his tone dripping with mock sympathy, "I don't know what stunt this boy thinks he's pulling, but surely we're not going to derail this trial because some high school student skipped his civics class." More laughter. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, stroking his chin as though entertaining the joke. "Mr. Blake makes a good point. This is a courtroom, not a stage for children to play dress up." He tilted his head as the boy. "So tell me, son, do you also plan to bring your lunchbox up here and argue over recess privileges?" The gallery burst into laughter once more, the mockery echoing against the walls. But the teenager did not flinch. His face remained calm, his hand steady as he laid out his papers on the defense table. He wasn't just putting on a show while his documents were color-coded, every page tagged with sticky notes, sections highlighted in bright neon, margins filled with precise handwriting. It looked more like the war manual of a seasoned litigator than the notes of a high schooler. Finally, he lifted his eyes and met the judge's gaze. His voice, when he spoke, was clear enough to slice through the laughter. "I've studied every ruling you've handed down involving this statute, Your Honor. Every single one. From Smith v. Andrews in 2016 to Harper v. State just last year." The laughter died down, not completely, but enough that the silence started to creep back in. People exchanged looks. The boy's words had carried weight. Judge Harrison blinked once, masking his surprise with another smirk. "So, you memorized a few case names. Cute trick. But this isn't about memory, this is about law. Do you even understand precedent?" The boy didn't miss a beat. "Yes. Precedent is what stops judges from contradicting themselves. It's why in Johnson v. City of Ashwood, when you ruled in favor of the defendant despite overwhelming public pressure, you specifically cited the constitutional principle of proportionality." "Should I keep going?" Gasps filled the air. Even Blake, the opposing attorney, frowned now, his smirk fading slightly. He recognized the sharpness of the boy's recall of the kind of instant citation that even practiced lawyers struggled with on their best days. Judge Harrison's lips pressed into a thin line. He adjusted his glasses. "Impressive memory," he muttered. "But memory alone doesn't win trials." The boy leaned forward, his voice slow but carrying through the courtroom. "Then let's test it. Let me cross-examine the witness." The gallery erupted in shocked whispers. Blake immediately stood, slamming a palm against the table. "Absolutely not. This is nonsense, Your Honor. I won't waste my time or this court's time indulging some teenager's fantasy of being Perry Mason." The boy tilted his head toward him. "Afraid, Mr. Blake?" The challenge hit like a spark in a room full of gas. The gallery hissed and murmured, excitement swelling. Cameras clicked. Reporters' pens raced faster than ever. Blake's face reddened. "Afraid? Of you? Don't be ridiculous." The boy's expression didn't change. "Then prove it. If you're so confident, let me ask a few questions. If I fail, you'll have all the ammunition you need to humiliate me and my client. But if I succeed, a broken bar." His eyes flicked back to the judge, steady and sharp. "A broken bar, then this courtroom will know the truth." Judge Harrison sat back, fingers drumming against the armrest. His mocking amusement had softened into something else now, a curiosity. He had seen seasoned attorneys beg, stumble, and grovel in this room, but never had he seen a teenager stand so calmly under pressure. "You're playing a dangerous game, boy," the judge said finally, voice low. "You realize one wrong question could sink your entire defense?" The boy didn't blink. "I've done my homework." The room held its breath. For the first time since the teenager walked in, the laughter was gone. In its place was something else, anticipation. Judge Harrison exhaled, tapping his gavel once. "Fine. Let the boy proceed." Gasps erupted again. Blake froze, disbelief written all over his face. The reporters nearly jumped from their seats. The teenager, unshaken, simply flipped open his folder, smoothed out his notes, and rose to his feet. His voice was calm, steady, unshaken. "Then let's begin." The courtroom fell into a tense silence as the teenager Daniel Carter rose from the defense table. He looked almost comically young standing beside the towering witness stand. His blazer sleeves were a little too long, his tie slightly crooked, but his voice carried a calm authority that made everyone lean forward. The witness, a middle-aged man in a neat gray suit, adjusted his tie nervously. He had seemed confident under Blake's questioning earlier, but now he eyed Daniel like someone staring at an unfamiliar opponent. Daniel picked up a yellow notepad and walked toward the stand. "Mr. Patterson," he began evenly, "you testified under oath that you saw my client at the scene of the alleged crime at 8:15 p.m., correct?" "Yes," Patterson replied, nodding quickly. "That's correct." Daniel took a few steps closer, flipping a page of his notes. "And you also said it was already dark outside when you saw him?" "Yes," Patterson said again. "It was dark, I remember it clearly." Daniel didn't trace his voice. He simply reached for a document from his folder and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. "Your Honor, this is the official meteorological report for that date, issued by the National Weather Service. According to this, sunset occurred at 8:36 p.m., not 8:15. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Patterson's face strained of color. Daniel tilted his head. "So why do you have the ability to see the future, or your testimony is a broken bar less than accurate? Which is it?" Blake shot up from his chair. "Objection. This is harassment of the witness." But Judge Harrison held up a hand, his eyes fixed on the report in front of him. His earlier smirk was gone. His voice carried a sharp edge. "Overruled. The witness will answer." Patterson swallowed hard. "Yeah, broken bar, I could have been mistaken about the exact time, but I know it was dark. Maybe my watch was a malfunctioning?" Daniel cut in smoothly, not giving him space to recover. "Strange, considering your phone records show you made a call at exactly 8:15 that evening. To your brother. Isn't that true?" Patterson blinked rapidly. "Yeah, broken bar, I don't remember." Daniel pulled another document from his folder. Would it refresh your memory if I submitted the phone company's official call log as evidence? Because it clearly shows you were on the phone for 3 minutes at 8:15. Which means, Mr. Patterson, you couldn't have been looking at my client at that time he broke and barked at you. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Patterson stammered, his voice breaking. Yeah, broken bar, well, maybe it was closer to 9, yeah. Daniel's eyes narrowed. So now your testimony changes? First it was 8:15. Now it's 9. Which one is it? Blake jumped to his feet again, his voice booming. Objection. The defense is twisting the witness's words. But Judge Harrison leaned forward, his gavel hovering but unused. His expression had shifted entirely, his mocking tone replaced by something far rarer, respect. Objection overruled. The defense is pointing out contradictions. Continue. Daniel turned back to Patterson, his tone sharper now. Mr. Patterson, isn't it true that you had every reason to lie? Isn't it true that you were promised leniency in your own pending fraud case in exchange for testimony against my client? The witness froze, eyes darting toward Blake. The opposing attorney's face turned red. Objection. Blake roared. Speculation. Completely unfounded. Daniel calmly lifted another sheet of paper, already marked with tabs and highlights. Your Honor, this is a copy of the prosecution's pretrial agreement with Mr. Patterson, signed 3 weeks ago. It clearly states that the prosecution would consider recommending reduced sentencing in exchange for cooperative testimony. The courtroom exploded in gasps. Reporters scribbled like mad, some even whispering into recorders for breaking news updates. Judge Harrison took the paper, adjusted his glasses, and read it carefully. His lips pressed into a hard line. Mr. Blake, he said coldly, did you fail to disclose this to the defense? Blake stammered. Yeah, it must have been an oversight, Your Honor. An oversight? The judge's voice cracked like a whip. This is a direct violation of Brady disclosure. I should hold you in contempt right now. The courtroom was electric, the audience buzzing with disbelief. And at the center of it all stood Daniel, calm as a storm contained, his hands resting lightly on his notes. He turned back to Patterson one final time. So, Mr. Patterson, considering you couldn't have seen my client when you claimed, considering you were on the phone at the exact time in question, and considering you were promised leniency for testimony broken bar, why should this court believe a single word you've said? Patterson's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He looked at Blake, then at the judge, then down at the table. Finally, he muttered, yeah, broken bar, I don't know. Silence. Daniel closed his folder, gave a small nod, and said, no further questions. The gallery erupted into applause before the bailiff shouted for order. Blake collapsed into his chair, sweat beading on his forehead. Judge Harrison's gavel struck, restoring silence, but his eyes never left the teenager who had just dismantled a key witness with surgical precision. For the first time that day, the courtroom wasn't laughing at Daniel Carter. It was listening. The courtroom was no longer the same place it had been an hour earlier. Gone was the laughter, the snickering, the smug disbelief. In its place was a heavy silence, one that seemed to press against every wall and every person inside. Judge Harrison sat frozen behind his bench, his gavel resting loosely in his hand. He had seen countless trials in his decades on the bench, seen lawyers cry, seen witnesses break, seen criminals confess, but never had he seen a teenager dismantle an entire prosecution case with such clinical precision. The gallery was equally stunned. Reporters leaned forward, their pens scratching furiously across notepads. Some had already typed out half their headlines on laptops, knowing they had just witnessed history. Jurors exchanged uneasy glances, whispering behind their hands. At the defense table, Daniel Carter calmly collected his papers, sliding each one back into his worn leather folder. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he knew everyone in the room was watching. The prosecutor, Richard Blake, was no longer the towering figure of authority he had been at the start of the trial. He sat slumped in his chair, jaw tight, sweat dotting his forehead. His star witness had collapsed under cross-examination, and the court had seen the very evidence he tried to bury. His case had disintegrated in front of him, all because of a boy he had dismissed as a joke. Finally, Judge Harrison cleared his throat. His voice, usually commanding, now carried a rare note of hesitation. Young Mona broken bar, he leaned forward, peering down at Daniel with narrowed eyes. Who exactly are you? Daniel snapped the folder shut and looked up, meeting the judge's gaze without fear. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 17 years old. The gallery gasped. A reporter in the back nearly dropped her recorder. Daniel continued, his voice steady, as if he had rehearsed this moment 100 times. I've been studying law since I was 10. My father was wrongfully convicted when I was a child, and ever since, I've made it my mission to understand the law better than the people who abused it. The courtroom was riveted. Every word seemed to echo louder than the gavel itself. Judge Harrison blinked, leaning back in his chair. 17? That's impossible. You can't even practice law at your age. Daniel gave a small smile. Ordinarily, number. But last month, under a special exemption, I passed the state bar exam. Today's my first case. Gasps again swept through the room, followed by a wave of murmurs. Even the jurors looked startled. Blake sputtered, slamming a hand on the table. "This is outrageous. Decisa. Out of law," Daniel interrupted smoothly. "I did everything by the book, Mr. Blake. More than I can say for you." The room erupted in whispers, some people laughing outright at the reversal of power. Judge Harrison slowly removed his glasses, rubbing his temples as though trying to make sense of what he was hearing. His voice came low, almost grudging. "So you're telling me, Broken Bar, I mocked you, ridiculed you, and you stood here the entire time as a fully licensed attorney?" Daniel inclined his head politely. "Yes, Your Honor. And I think today proved why age doesn't always determine ability." The words hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time all trial, the judge looked at him not as a boy, not as a nuisance, but as an equal. Silence stretched for several beats before the judge finally struck his gavel. "This court of Broken Bar," he hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing on his words. "This court owes you an apology, Counselor Carter." The gallery exploded with chatter. Some clapped, others gasped. Reporters shouted questions toward the defense table, flashes from cameras brightening the room. Daniel stood there calmly, shoulders square, his expression unreadable. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile smugly. He simply nodded once, as if accepting what he had known would come all along. "Apology accepted," he said firmly. "Now, about my client's acquittal." The judge straightened, all traces of mockery gone from his face. He looked toward the jury box. In light of the prosecution's failure to disclose evidence, the contradictions in the witness's testimony, and the defense's compelling arguments, this case is dismissed. The defendant is acquitted of all charges. The gavel struck hard. For a moment, the room erupted into chaos of cheers, gasps, the frantic clicking of cameras. Blake buried his face in his hands, defeated. The jurors looked stunned, some even smiling with relief. But all eyes eventually turned back to Daniel Carter, the teenager who had walked onto a courtroom as a laughingstock and walked out as a legend. As Daniel gathered his things, sliding the worn folder back into his backpack, a reporter called out, "Daniel, what's next for you?" He paused, looking back at the sea of eyes fixed on him. His answer was calm, almost humble, yet carried a weight that silenced the room once more. "What's next?" He slung the backpack over his shoulder. "I keep fighting. Because the law should protect people, not crush them." With that, he walked out of the courtroom, leaving behind a judge who would never forget the day he mocked a teenager of Broken Bar only to discover he was a genius attorney in disguise.